Hello, everyone. Wayne Hunter again with AvTek Solutions. I appreciate everybody joining in with us. Today, we're going to follow up from our previous two webinars where we talked about the industry, state of it for cybersecurity insurance. And then in our second one, we talked about what are the requirements we need to be aware of. Today, we're going to talk about how we can help you, both DataStream and AvTek Solutions, address those requirements and make sure you're covered when you need to be. And today, joining me is Larry Meter and John. They're both going to kind of tag team. Larry needs a little help here, but
I'm getting old these days.
We were just having a good chuckle. He's got that Razorback in the background, and I'm LSU Tiger, so I said, "Bring the bacon on. I'm hungry." So,
I'm ready for basketball season.
You got to look forward to something. So,
isn't that the truth?
So let's get started here. So what we're going to talk about today is about how do you set up your cyber insurance, your cybersecurity program for success. So let's get into this. So one of the things we look at in success is it's not one thing or two things. It's a team that you got to go off and look at this. You got the company, what you need to understand, what is your risk measurement, things of that nature. What does the insurance do? You got the policy and underwriters that bring the policy that's going to best fit for your business. And then you got MSPs, IT consultants like myself that are helping you make sure you stay compliant to those requirements. So when and if you need them, they'll actually be there. So the first thing I want to get into is with John and Larry is we always hear what I'm seeing here lately about purchasing policies. It's changed so much in the last 12 to 18 months because I'm seeing questions from underwriters I've never seen before. We talked about it in the requirements video. But what are you guys looking at? What is your perspective? We've seen others, but for you guys are down working with the partners, working with the customers, and really getting those policies in place and determining what they can have. What are you seeing?
Yeah, let's kind of jump into the history of this real quick because one thing I think a lot of people don't realize is that cyber insurance has been around for a really long time. It just you didn't hear about it. I mean, it's been around since the 1990s, but it was really kind of pre-pandemic where you started hearing a whole lot of things. And, you're right. We have seen a real shift in the insurance market, and there's a reason for that. It was really, as you say, easy to acquire, and now it's a little bit more difficult. And really kind of what happened here is a bunch of carriers jumped in because they said, hey, here's a new product, cyber insurance. We can sell this. We're going to throw our own weight behind this. We're going to create our own products, all of that good stuff. But they didn't ultimately understand cybersecurity technology. I mean, this is a pretty complex business, nor were these carriers working with folks like you, Wayne, IT consultants, MSPs, MSSPs. So they launched, premiums were really inexpensive as they just didn't fully understand the risk. And there just wasn't enough actuarial data available for them to accurately price all of this stuff. So, claims started rolling in, insurers started taking the losses, and hey, we all know insurance is there. It's a for-profit business. So many of them quickly exited the market, which kind of drove the shift in the insurance market for the past couple of years. So premiums started rising, sometimes significantly. But the carriers that remained started getting a lot smarter about this, and they started requiring more security controls to be in place because they want to do what they can to help reduce the risk and help reduce the losses. And some of the experts out there, and I'm not one of them, but some of the experts have said that the premiums that you're seeing today are the premiums that should have been out there 3, 4, 5 years ago. Just some of those carriers kind of came in and just underpriced it because they just didn't understand things.
Yeah, coming from that, and now because of that shift and the questions we get, we're seeing people being denied policies because they don't have some basic things in place. And in the requirements we had in the last one, we talked about 4 or 5, and then we looked at some others that follow on behind it. But from the main ones that you're seeing being denied, these are the ones that I see the most about the backups, about multi-factor authentication, MDR, XDR, EDR, and cyber. It's amazing. Security awareness training, for as long as it's been around and it's talked about, and as easy as it to implement, I see so many people not doing it.
Yeah. And it's scary. I mean, that's one of the simplest things you can do is get out there and just educate people.
Mm-hmm.
Give them this security awareness training. That's why that has crept up rather quickly as one of the top 4 things out there. And, that one's not necessarily technology based or tool based. That's just education.
Right.
That's
Matter of fact, the
education.
FBI, if you read it, if you look at the FBI's website, and when we talk to them, 90% of all issues that arise from cybersecurity penetration, hackers getting in, is due to lack of training. That is, they got it right there on their main website. Training is one of the number one reasons why people get hacked.
You are absolutely correct. And while these are the top 4, there's also some other things out there that can really have an impact on it. Like, are you in a high risk industry? Um, do you have poor cyber hygiene? If so, you need to be working with people like Wayne, because they're not going to let you have poor cyber hygiene. They're going to make sure that you have adequate cybersecurity testing procedures, audits, all of that good stuff. Do you have inefficient processes? And these applications, these insurance applications, are going to ask you questions about, what type of internal processes do you have? Are you staying current on software releases? Are you staying current on your patches? Are you adhering to published security standards like NIST? You name it. So just kind of throwing that stuff out there as well.
Before we go into now that if we get you in a good place, and we have the hygiene in place, and we're following the requirements of industry like you brought up, because that's a lot of things changing. Because like if you look at FTC safeguard rules, if you're looking at what's going on from FFIEC and others, you got those bases you got to cover. Before we get into about now, we're on the other side of what we see from rejection. Lee has got us a question. If a company is denied coverage, or if the coverage premiums are so high, you start to question if the legalization of marijuana was involved in the quote. Wow. Okay. How long before they can reapply for a policy?
Hey, John, do you know if there is a certain minimum period of time before someone can reapply if they've been denied?
It looks like
Oh, it looks like we just lost John.
he's coming back in. There he
Oh,
goes.
there we go. Sorry about that. To my knowledge, John, can you hear me?
You're
Yeah,
muted, John.
sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Not sure what happened. Just all it must have had a quick internet crash. What was the I missed the very end of the question
No,
itself.
How
essentially
long?
what we're just kind of saying here is, if you're a company and you get denied cyber insurance coverage, how long do you have to wait before you can reapply? Is there a certain minimum time?
No, we're actually finding that there is more back and forth with the carriers. What often happens is that, you go in and you apply, and they'll come back and say, sorry, no. And oftentimes they'll give you some reasons, right? They'll say like, you didn't
Hmm.
have MFA, you don't have MFA in place, you don't have offsite backups. So at that point, you can often go get those things implemented and come back to the carrier and try again. Now, there's no certainties there, and is exactly why we highly suggest at least getting some of these basics in place before actually going out and
Yep.
shopping around. But
Well,
yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing right now.
yeah, Lee's was more, he was even talking about, coverage is high. I think
Mhm.
that's the other thing to that. I know it's what I work with you guys on is we work with a broker that has access to a whole portfolio. I think you guys have like 40 plus different
You got it.
uh, paths to
Carriers.
go, carriers and underwriters that you can actually work with. So if one's there, if you're doing it individually and you're going and trying to shop that manually, that right there gets really cumbersome and a lot of overhead. I highly recommend getting with someone like DataStream that's a broker for many carriers, because then
Yeah.
they can try to get you to the right one. I think that's a
Absolutely.
way of driving that and helping there as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 40 carriers, and as well, we have access to products and marketplaces that the average business might not have access to.
Right.
So oftentimes we may be able to come up with some better options.
All right. So we've got our
Yeah.
policy in place and we're going on. What are some of the likely reasons why people all of a sudden will have issues and get denied on their claim? So we go in, you get you got the policy, and they go, okay, I've got everything in place. I know from experience of some of the customers I talk to is they attempted putting things in place, and for the most part, they had some pretty decent things in place. The problem was they missed some requirements that were stated actually in the policy that they didn't catch.
Yep.
I see that happen a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every policy's got some exclusions. So we always say, make sure you know your policy. And you don't have to be an expert here, but you've got a resource in Wayne on the technology tools processes side. And you can also use us as a resource on the insurance side. And we can kind of help coach you through these things and help make you that expert, or at least, everybody's got a great supporting cast underneath them. Use us as that supporting cast. The most likely reason, as we say on the screen up there, is that a company fails to follow the cybersecurity requirements that they attested to, and that's a huge one. You're going to need tangible evidence in the form of documentation of all of the preventative measures that you have attested to, that you have undertaken, and it needs to be thorough, it needs to be accurate, and it needs to be kept updated throughout the life of the policy. Don't just attest to it, document it at the beginning, and then 6 months down the road, you've added another 100 devices or things like that, and you haven't documented that they have all of these things. That's just going to lead to problems for you.
Yeah. And going from there, one of the things, because obviously I went ahead and all my policies analyzed by you guys to make sure where we were at. And I even found something on the reporting process. We had a reporting process, but we had 2 steps backwards that we had to go change. But it was one of these things is I like to call the fine print that I didn't catch in there, which you guys did for me. John knows exactly what I'm talking about. So the other thing I see is where I've run into business that says, hey, I got my owner's policy. I've got my my general liability policies, all that. I'm good.
Nope.
No, you're not.
Nope, you usually aren't. What we're talking about here is, I think they used to call them package policies, but
Yep.
you're talking about a rider off of your CGL, your commercial general liability, or your BOP, your business owner's policy. And, riders are, yeah, they're pretty limited. We often kind of jokingly say that if you've got a rider, it's probably going to just cover the cost of coffee and donuts for the incident response team, should you have some type of security incident, because they really kind of cap out. They don't include so many things, and all we do here at DataStream is offer standalone cyber insurance policies as well as tech E&O, which I think we'll talk about as we continue on down the road.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add on to that is that it's one of the reasons why even cyber has almost this stigma around it of, aren't they, really like don't pay out. More oftentimes than not, when you dig into those cases, when people are like, yeah, they didn't pay out, more often than not, it was a claim against a general liability policy or your BOP, right? And once upon a time, there actually was some relative language that a couple people had kind of filed claims on successfully. But in 2014, they made really hard. They added language and took out language from your general and your BOP to specifically exclude cyber coverage. So while once upon a time, that may have been the case, it is absolutely no longer the case where your general will cover you at all. It's also very difficult to try and file against the general. But yeah, that's kind of where the whole stigma of like, isn't it really finicky? That's where that kind of came from.
That's that fine print, right?
Yeah,
you got it.
Yeah, yep.
So there's another side about this, and actually I know a few people has run into this where they had a cyber policy. They were actually doing the things that the policy was set to. So they was doing their due diligence. They did the right things. They made sure that their policies to their SOPs, to the controls they were supposed to meet, the requirements in the cybersecurity insurance policies were met. That was good. But then they ran into a problem and they didn't have enough coverage. They didn't calculate the coverage. How does people go about making sure they have that enough coverage?
Yeah, once again, on the riders typically don't have a whole lot of coverage on them, but on the standalone policy, one of the rule of thumbs that we kind of go by. Let's say you're a $10 million annual revenue company. The bare minimum policy we would most likely recommend would be $1 million, which is a little shy. We really try to say, take a look at your annual revenue, divide it by 4, and make sure that you have at least, in this case, it'd be $2.5 million in coverage, because sometimes if you're going to get hit, it's going to take substantially longer than a few hours to get you back online. It can go days, weeks, depending on the severity, it could go even longer. So, that $2.5 million coverage, or 25% of your annual revenue, is really kind of what we recommend. And for any business, we typically don't recommend a policy below $1 million, regardless of what the revenue is. So, yeah, good rule of thumb is 25% of your annual revenue.
So is that a DataStream rule, or is it across the industry? Is there any commonality when it comes to that?
The commonality, I
go
would
ahead,
say,
John.
if there is it's not like a, necessarily a requirement, but what you can say is that it is the most common policy right now that is being offered and purchased. Is like $1 million policy is the most common one that we are seeing right now, and it's what we suggest, mainly because it comes actually out of like a lot of these research reports that came out. Like IBM had their research that talked about how the average cost for an incident, an actual data breach for a company under 500 employees, right? So on the smaller end of things, was still about $3 million, right? And that's the average. So this is exactly why, we highly suggest, at least no matter what your size is, starting with that $1 million in coverage. And the other thing is, because it is the most kind of common policy out there right now as far as a standalone policy, they're also not extraordinarily expensive, right? $1 million sounds like a lot, and it is a lot in coverage, but it goes quickly in a data breach.
It does.
And the policies themselves are fortunately not super expensive. So
The forensics cost alone is where it really bites you a lot, and then revenue loss if you're coming into there that you're going to come to. You take just those two components,
Precisely,
up really quick. There is, if they were not working with a data stream there, and folks are talking to an agent or whatever, how should they approach them about how that agent is going to be quoting them on coverage? Should they entice them about what are your rule sets about coverage or things of that nature to see if they're a good fit? Or is that something that only you would do with a broker per se?
One of the things that we have seen, and your local agent, they may be really good at workers' comp. They may be fantastic at CGL. They may be fantastic at home, auto, life, business owners policies, different things like that. But from what we've seen, the vast majority of them don't necessarily understand the cybersecurity space. And the vast majority of them aren't talking with people like Wayne or other MSPs, ITCs out there to get educated, to work with these guys, to make sure that customers really have a secure foundation with their cybersecurity stack. So, it sounds self-serving, but it's always good to work with a specialist broker, and we're not the only one out there. We just happen to be the best. At least I think we are, and so does John, and hopefully Wayne does too. But there are other brokers out there. But find someone that seems to really know what they're doing with cyber insurance. Hopefully it's us, but if it's not us, like I said, there are others out there. And some of the things that you can look for, in a good standalone policy is, as we say on the slide, pay attention to those sublimits, because you might have a $5 million policy, but you might have $50,000 in ransomware coverage. Well, that's gonna get eaten up really, really quick. And if you've got to get a hit and you've got ransomware at $3 million, you only got $50,000 coverage. So when you put a policy in place, make sure it's covering for data loss, the recovery of the data, business interruption, loss of revenue, as Wayne mentioned a few moments ago, loss of transferred funds, computer fraud, cyber extortion, also known as ransomware. there's lots of things that a standalone policy can cover, but pay attention to those sublimits. And one big thing, and I'm sure it was covered on some of the other webinars, um, there's a difference between reimbursable and pay on behalf of. We feel that for the SMB, it's worth a few more dollars in your premium to get a pay on behalf of policy, because what that means is the insurance company is going to pay on behalf of you and take care of everything without you having to outlay a bunch of cash and get reimbursed 30, 60, 90 days down the road. Because as you know, with insurance, it doesn't move quickly, and that reimbursement can take a while before it comes in. So your premium is going to be a little bit more expensive for a pay on behalf of, but in the long run, I really think it's worth it.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily always like that much more expensive either. It'll typically, or not typically, it can also be, some of the policies aren't necessarily more expensive, but those are going to be the ones that are going to have more of your technological requirements, right? Like it's always that, kind of that trade-off there,
Now, one of the recent changes here, and thank Lords of London brought out and kind of brought to the forefront here a few months ago, was the war exclusion.
Yep.
And that's really coming across from the nation state attacks that we see happening. And now Lords of London have stated specifically them that they're not going to cover that because they consider that under the war exclusions. So is all the carriers doing this, or is that just Lords of London and a few others?
Yeah, I got quite a bit of information on this one. So war exclusion exists in essentially every insurance policy that has ever been written, no matter whether it's a home, auto, different things like that. If you go look at your home and your auto policy, you might find a war exclusion in there. So it's existed since insurance was created. And the reason is that, hey, insurance is a collective way of handling risk. The amount of losses that could be related to a war are so huge that it could essentially bankrupt all insurance companies overnight. So that's why the war exclusion exclusion exists in the policies. The challenge here is that there are warlike events, and it's unclear whether it's a war or a conflict or a nation state. So it's really rare that the war exclusion is used. Lloyd's did, and they do kind of set the standard out there. When you were very astute to bring this up, they have come out with this nation state policy that added clarity that nation state attacks will be excluded. But you know what? 99% of the activity we see is really related to criminals, crime, insiders. It's non-nation state related. But again, if these exclusions didn't exist, the cost of insurance would be absolutely astronomical. So there was one thing I was reading that came out that keep this in mind when you're worried about the war exclusion, when you're worried about more about the nation state, I should say. And that is every policy is going to state that the insurer shall have the burden of proving that this exclusion applies. That's damn near impossible because, sometimes with these, threat actors, it may originate in one place and then go through some other, criminal bodies in different countries, different things like that. It's so hard to track all of this stuff down. So don't let this scare you off too much is the bottom line.
Yeah, that was a question I get quite a bit. So I want to make sure we cover it. So let's get into, we've talked about the things about getting the policy, you got it in place, what can happen in there. So now we switch gears about actually how we can actually help. That we've been leading up to this and all the two series before and here. So first I want to go through what we do with DataStream about how we help get an understanding of actually, I'm trying to figure out what is my customer's requirement. So first thing we do is go get the policy and put it through some tools. So I want to go through what we do with you guys so they can understand what we're going to do and how we're going to get to a point of being able to figure out how we help them. So one of the first things we do is we take in and I fill out the pre-application about the customer. So
Mhm.
John, you want to take us through this a little bit here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the best things that you can do to set yourself up for success when going out and looking into cyber coverage is take a look at how you're currently, being viewed by those cyber carriers, right? And so one of the things that we're able to do is run your company through a quick assessment, right? It's going to highlight any potential basically red flags that are going to pop up when you're applying for insurance, right? And so being able to do this ahead of time just all feeds into the things that we've already been discussing, right? Is making sure that you're prepared, making sure you have as many of those carriers as options, right? Making sure you're getting those controls set up so that you can actually get options from as many of the carriers as possible, right? And setting yourself up for success by planning ahead of time.
Yep. And to add to that, I mean, this assessment that we're doing, like John said, it's just kind of a way of getting in front of the process, because this assessment is exactly what every single carrier is going to run on your company at the time of application. So, in my opinion, it's always good to get ahead of the process so that you can sit here and identify and work with Wayne or your IT consultant. Just, work with them to find out, okay, hey, there was a red flag raised. Maybe I've got a patch that hasn't been taken care of. Maybe I've got an open port. Maybe I don't have MFA, something like that. Identify these things up front so you can get them taken care of. Then that's going to help you in the long run increase the number of carriers that might want to insure you, as well as reduce your premium, sometimes substantially.
So we go through theirs, and actually, we got an example of the actual report you're talking about. After we go through this, I'll show you
Mhm.
what we're talking about. This is where we find CVEs and things of that nature. So that readiness, we really take that's when I'm talking with the client. I'm asking various questions like, do you have, someone responsible for cybersecurity
Yep.
implementation? Do you have an incident response plan? Do you have immutable backups? Do you have MFA in? Those are the type of questions it's answering that we're pulling in, which are typical questions we're getting from the underwriters. That's really where it's originating from, right? Is what is the carriers going to ask? So we get that. Now we go into the next piece is we talk about instant response plan builder. And this is where we got some guidance about building an IRP if you don't have one. Or maybe I like still doing this even if they have one, because 9 times out of 10, when I find somebody that has one, it's a template that has the names changed on
Bingo.
them. Okay. And while that, when the writers, that would suffice for the writers, it does not, absolutely will not pass today, because if you get audited, they look at it and they go, okay, here's your policy, here's your SOP, here's your IRP. Joe, do it. And if it doesn't work and it's not meeting what you actually do, guess what? They can deny you right off
Yep.
the bat.
They
And
sure
that's
can.
actually happening and coming in. So I always recommend people test. But with this, we can actually get a start with your planner by filling the information in and actually building a specific plan, which I don't know
Yep.
how many other insurance companies are actually doing this, to be honest with you, because I don't see
Yeah,
a lot
we
of them doing it out there.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the things that we definitely focused on is obviously not only getting customers the best obviously policies at the best price, but also making sure they're set up for success with that policy,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't do you a whole lot of good if the worst case scenario does happen and that policy is not going to pay out, right? So doing things to set yourself up. Like having an incident response plan, we created a builder to at least get you started on that, right? Making sure that you are keeping track of the things that you're having in place, right? We have an auditing tool for that, right? To keep track of these things, all to set you up for success, right? And make sure that God forbid that this is the worst day of anybody's business life, right? If you're hit by one of these and God forbid you're staring down potential bankruptcy and all this stuff that can that can happen as a result, you want to make sure that that claim's gonna go through, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and a couple other things, if I can add on that IRP or the incident response plan. Um, you know, it's great to have an incident response plan, but just don't put an incident response plan together without testing it.
That's
When
exactly.
you have some type of security incident, let's imagine it's Monday morning, you're a company, you got 25 employees, You walk in at 8 a.m. in the morning and every single computer is locked up. What are you going to do? If you don't have an incident response plan, you're going to panic. You're going to get stressed. You're going to be like, holy cow, let's unplug everything. Let's plug everything back in. If you got an incident response plan, it's going to kind of walk you through exactly what you need to do. Who do you need to call? What needs to be done next? Different things like that. And so it's critical to have this incident response plan. And this is going to sound kind of funny, but it's real. We've heard this so many times.
Exactly.
Make sure you got a paper copy of your incident response plan, and it's in a safe. It's in a safe place or something like that. Because if you got an electronic copy and all your systems are down, guess what? You're not going to be able to access that incident response plan. So make sure you got a paper copy. And then one of the other things that we also offer is we do tabletop sessions, testing, whatever you want to call it. And these are simulated breaches so that you can test your incident response plan, identify any deficiencies or gaps that you might have in that thing so that you can kind of tweak that plan and be prepared. It's like a playbook. I mean, football teams don't go out there, like my Razorbacks, they don't go out there. I had to throw that in, Wayne, just for you. They don't go out there without a game plan. They have a playbook and they rehearse that playbook so that they know exactly what they're going to do in any situation. And that's exactly what an incident response plan does.
And that's we several of the customers we got from banking to what we talk about that, and that we do the tabletop, as you know, because we've talked about this many times. But we always tell them that when you go to this plan and you start executing it, I think it's very important is you got the team that's there. When you're going through, if you find an issue, just say issue, put it there. Don't stop, don't tunnel, keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Go all the way through until you identify, then come back and address those things. Because I find so many people go in here and then they tunnel and then they lose vision of the whole thing. And they got to come back and restart. And it works way better if you do that tabletop exercise and then come on the back end side of it.
You got it.
So that's what's here. So one of the things we, as we follow on that, we got those things in place, but then we start looking at about how do we evaluate what we're doing, put in place. And by working with your IT team, your IT consultant, MSP, and the insurance company coming to this, these are some of the things that we're able to go off and do and generate external reports to say, how have you improved from the beginning to where you are now?
Yep.
How we have, so we can actually quantify what we've done to improve. So with your policy and the things you're putting in place, management's wanting to know, okay, we've put these things in place, we got this cost, but what's our benefit from it? We can actually show that.
Absolutely, you can. Absolutely, you can. And one of the things we're also doing, and we're still kind of in the process of making sure all this is going to work. I mean, we like to pride ourselves on kind of providing white glove service to any of the customers that Wayne or other IT consultants send over to us. And that white glove service includes quite a few things. But one of those things is, we talked about the cyber insurance readiness assessment and doing that before you actually apply for insurance. But many of the carriers these days are running continuous scans on your domain, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly. So one of the things that we are kicking off is we're going to scan that domain every month so that we can identify all of a sudden any major variations. And then we can notify your IT consultant and say, hey, we got this one client that looked really good, but all of a sudden we see a couple of things that have popped up. So we're, again, guys, it's important. You got the technology people in Wayne, you got the insurance people in us, and we're talking together to make sure, and we're working together to make sure that you truly are fully covered.
That's one of the things I like about this, because I go into what we put in. Not only can we do help with the security staff, but we also have our compliance as a service. As you know, we come in and we're doing the vulnerability, internal, external vulnerability scanning. We're taking based on tracking the whole system of policy. We're applying the standards in place, whether it's cybersecurity standards, whether it be FINRA standards, NIST, CIS, whatever it may, Fedline, FFIEC. We can put those in place and we monitor that. So our system will show us when we're going out of compliance, so we know what to go address.
Yep.
But we always like to have two. I always like to have two. Ours is good, but I wanted that other view. And so that's where we stack these two together to where we make sure, because technology, things change, everybody's going. If I got multiple tools looking at it, it gives me a better sense that I'm catching what I need to catch, right? So we
You got
layer
it.
that on, and that's where we come in and do these things. And one of the things is we've been talking about how we're layering these things together, right? It's the risk. What's the customer's risk? What do they need to have to do? What's their industry standards? What's their internal risk as a business? What is their customer? What is their employee applies to you? What is your vendor's risk? Your B2B risk, that what's your acceptable risk? What you got to have there? What are you going to require? That's determined on that business side. And then insurance is looking at this, meeting from those things to understand for to the coverage. This is what you're going to have in place for coverage of that business there. And then from the IT perspective, let's make sure we have these things not only implemented, but we're actively monitoring it. We're
Yep.
actually updating it, not once every 6 months or once every 12 months. Now these days, we're monitoring weekly and adjusting. So we're going through those, and we find, because now in today's business, we found is you never know when you're going to be asked for what is your security posture.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to set up new business. You're going to do business with somebody else. Now people are being asked, do you have your security policies in place? What is your compliance require? Where you stand there? Is your security, cybersecurity insurance in place? They ask these questions. Well, now you're scrambling to go put that together. And that's the reason why we started saying, okay, we're going to do this as a service to make sure you've got what you need whenever you need it.
Yep.
Well, there's a result of that by doing this is that actually is going to help you when you start getting your policies and what your cost is going to be on that policy, because now you can prove your stance, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Very good.
And at the
Wayne,
very least, set you up for success, right? Like
yeah.
again, yeah, making sure that when that god awful day comes, all your ducks are in a row. It's going to make everything so much easier when that day does come, right? And just highly increase the likelihood of your claim being accepted, right? If you've been setting yourself up and doing all the right things right, and then keeping good records, right? Making sure that you can prove these things.
Well, I think it's very important also for customers to understand is the reason why we harp on these things, especially from an IT perspective. I don't do business with anyone unless they put our security stack in place.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason, because now in the industry day, if you're working with an IT consultant, you got a managed service provider in there, they have shared responsibility with the customer. Okay. So if they're not doing this practice not only on themselves, but making sure you're doing them, you're already in a situation of being potentially denied and being out of compliance. Okay. Because it's the whole world's changed now. So that's the reason why we do business. If the customer doesn't want to do this, that's fine. No problem. But I can't do business with you.
Yep.
I just can't, because I got to make sure we're secure.
Yep.
You know, I don't do business with anybody unless they have multi-factor authentication in place. You don't have it, you don't want to use it, that's on you. I can't do business with you.
Yep.
And
So
that's why AvTek and Wayne, you're a joy to work with, because you get this, you understand it, and just like you said, you make your clients have this stuff in place because you understand the severity of it if they don't.
I really want to make sure we educate the customers on what they need to do, whether they do business with us or they do business with somebody else. These are things you really got to make sure you're doing.
Precisely.
So this is the report we was talking about just a moment ago. So with our platform, we got in our stuff in place. This is what kind of report I get from John and the guys is when I'm first talking to a potential customer looking at policy, let's go ahead and get their policy and audit it. And then we run this right off the bat to get a basis of where they're sitting at. And this is the report you were talking about just a moment ago, Larry,
You
which
got
can
it.
be run at any time.
You got it. This is the cyber insurance readiness assessment. Literally takes minutes for us to run it. And then we provide it to Wayne, let him kind of take a look at this so that he can assess and see what's going on, and then talk with you about what's going on. We can be involved in the conversation as well.
So I'm going to stop right there for a second and go back to a question. Lee had another question. Lee, Lee can be on any of my webinars because he always brings up good questions. Yep. Is there any variation in the types of coverages each of the insurers DataStreams worked with? In other words, one application is a return of apples to apples response. I would
Yeah,
say,
that
based on my experience, every carrier is different.
Yes, yeah, exactly what I was gonna say. And is one of the main reasons we highly suggest working with kind of an expert in the space right now, right? Is because it's unlike other insurance, industries, other spaces. It's not like your home or your auto where it's been standardized over many, many years, right? The past several decades, right? Those guys have been standardized. Whereas insurance, like we were chatting about in the beginning, cyber insurance, while it has been around for a little while, the carriers are really playing catch up right now after the last few years of
Mhm.
claims and all the incidents. And so what you're seeing is not really any standardization, right? You have some carriers that have their own requirements and their own policies. You have them kind of all over the space, and is exactly why we highly suggest number one, having as many options as you possibly can when you're going out and shopping for insurance, cyber insurance specifically. And number two, working with an expert who actually knows the space, because we also know, which carriers are going to work with with which size companies, as well as which industry is the best, and so can also gear you in the right direction. And then you nailed it at the end there, Lee. What we do is bring back that apples to apples comparisons and show obviously what all the coverages look like under each of the policies that we're going to bring back. Highlight, the strong points of each individual policy. Offer obviously our recommendations on what we feel would work best for that customer, obviously based on their unique kind of risk, and then let the customer decide from there. But we do the best to set them up for success in the space, given how crazy the space is right now.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, I mean, John's absolutely right. We do all of that, and we lay it out in a very easy to read grid format. Nobody wants to go through, and at least I don't even want to do this, go through and read an insurance policy word for word, punctuation for punctuation. So what we do is we do that for you. Then we put everything into a grid format so that you're looking at it in an apples to apples comparison, and we just highlight the differences that we see in the various policies, and we really do our best to try to make a recommendation on which policy is going to be best for your specific business. It's not a one size fits all. This is the policy we're always going to push to everyone. No, it's very much dependent on your specific business requirements. So we'll take all of those quotes that we get, put it together in a grid, present it to you, and highlight the best one specific for your business.
Well, and the other thing about that, when you start looking at the apples to apples and coming into the different carriers, what makes it really tough is not all carriers are asking the same questions. Some, there are more
Mhm.
risk tolerant than others. So from a business standpoint, what I might be risk tolerant to is not the next guy's. It's the same thing I'm finding out with the actual underwriters. Where I've got some that's going to ask you questions I'd never been asked before.
Yeah.
We went, if you remember the one I was dealing with in August, was
Yep.
they wanted to know exactly how many records in the whole environment had PII information in it. But they also listed out 35 different areas, one of them being internet browsing cache. Well,
Yeah.
how's a customer going to figure that out? They don't have the tools to do it. We do. We know how to go find it, but that's data mining there. That's data
Yeah.
classification, and that's
Yep.
not a typical thing that people are doing in F&B environments. So, so you're going to have some of those that come into it, and as it drives to it, I think there are going to be requirements, especially because some of the things is changing in industry, like the
Mhm.
FTC safeguard rule, where you're going to have to now find that information and either work with someone that can, or figure out how to do it yourself to go get that information. But then not only do you report the number of records, but now you're like, okay, where does it sit in your environment? What controls does it apply to? Now, what is your security posture that you have in place on that? And what is your documentation to prove that you're doing it?
Yeah.
When I got those questions for this little company, I was blown away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'd never seen anything that detailed from any underwriter. But I
Yeah.
think that's going to start becoming more and more common. Is that
Yeah, and a lot of people might even notice that these questions have gotten a bit more ambiguous and can sometimes be hard to answer. Yeah, and that is a result of these carriers. That's them actually trying to play that catch up game, right? Where not all those questions that are found in those lengthier and lengthier risk assessments are actually like requirement questions, right? Or red flag questions. They're data questions, right? They're trying to build up these data sets and dig into, okay, what does my customer actually look like internally? What tools do they have in place? What is their kind of cybersecurity stance currently? Because they haven't had any of that insight on the internal aspects at all in the past. So that's exactly why we're seeing these kind of risk assessments get more and more complex, and every carrier is a different assessment. And also one of the reasons what we did was took all of those risk assessments, brought them down into a universal application, and actually brought the language down on a lot of those, pulled it away from the insurance and legalese that those guys are often written in, brought it down to more, SMB tech world, so that we can all have a discussion around it. And it ideally makes a little more sense than some of the some of the
So,
questions on the insurance side.
so really opening up for questions and answer right now for anybody who's got questions. Lee, keep asking if you got any more. Um, One of the things that I wanted to ask, and I haven't seen where there's really a written standard for this or recommendation for this. But from what you're seeing in the market today, how often should a business have their policy reviewed?
Yeah, I mean, I would have it if you haven't had it reviewed or if you haven't ever had it reviewed, I would absolutely have it reviewed immediately, right? And then I personally, if you're not working with, necessarily an expert in the space who's kind of walking you through the policy at the time of the renewal and all of that, you know, I would highly think about connecting at least once a year with an expert to review your current policy. And typically, you want to actually do that before your renewal that's coming up, right? You actually want to set yourself up for success, because when your renewal comes around, especially when it comes to cyber insurance, you want as many options as possible, right? And we have already seen, and some of the folks out there may have even experienced, the increase in their premiums at come time their renewal, right? And sometimes that's double or triple. Sometimes, in worst case, I've heard quadrupling of premiums. So
Hmm.
you definitely want some options, and want to be able to basically be working with an expert right now in that space. And I would say at least once a year, right before your renewal, is a perfect time to set
Yep.
up kind of a policy review.
Two things I'd like to add to that if I could. John's absolutely right. Get it reviewed absolutely as soon as possible if you haven't already done it. But when it comes to renewal, don't come to us 2 days before your renewal, because
Yeah.
it might take a little bit longer. We always say 120 days out, 90 days out, be aware when that renewal is coming due. And that's a really good time to take a look at it. And one other thing I just wanted to throw out there, because I've heard a lot of confusion on this. Just like when you put a home policy in place or you put in an auto policy, you've got it, it's a year contract. You get into it 4 months down the road, somebody comes to you and says, I can save you so much on insurance. You have the right to cancel your agreement and put a new agreement in place if you find a better agreement, better coverage, better premiums, all of that. Same thing applies to cyber insurance. So if you're in the middle of your term, we can still review it. We can still go out there and get options for you. And if we find something better and cheaper, you'll get a prorated refund on your old policy. We'll put the new policy in place. It's really a pretty simple thing. So just want to make sure we cleared up any confusion on that.
So another twist to it, and I'm really looking because this is some of the questions I get, and I tell them if you're uncomfortable, you're seeing change, you're seeing things in the news, you see the FTC come out, and if you're not sure about it, call us. We'll review it and see how
Bingo.
it applies to you. It's not we do it for you. We don't charge you.
Yep.
We're doing this for free for you. We can do it and come into it, so you don't have to guess whether or not that applies or you're covered or how it's going to work. Just go ahead and reach out to us. We'll take care of it. It's you can reach out to me anytime. Go to our website. You can book with us. We'll get in. I'll get with John and the guys. We'll get it analyzed and tell you where your posture's at. and then based on that, make some recommendation on what you need to do. So you are sitting where you need to be. So you don't have to wait based on renewals or price. What I see a lot of times is, especially as fast as things are changing today, when you see something, you might want to ask, because 9 times out of 10, sooner or later, it's going to apply when it comes to cybersecurity insurance. So it's fast changing right now. At least that's how I'm approaching it with my clients.
Yep. No,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
spot on, man. Spot on. Everything we do is free. We're here. You're not out there alone. Lean on people like us, lean on people like Wayne that can help advise you and steer you in the right direction, because we're here to make sure that you guys are protected, covered, and most of all, if you do have that inevitable breach that's going to happen someday, that you're in a really good position to make sure that you get paid out.
Well, we got another question. Guess who?
Lee,
Lee
man,
asked,
Lee's loaded, isn't he?
I'm telling you,
Love it.
I love Lee. That standard, Larry, he asked, contracts are not locked in with insurers, breaking the agreement without penalty. Those were his question marks.
Yep, I kind of see that down there. And to my knowledge, and I'm not an attorney, I'm not anything, I'm not providing legal advice or anything else. To my knowledge, it's pretty standard. Are there some carriers out there that won't let you do that? There very well may be. But for the most part, I think it's pretty standard. You've got a 1-year agreement. You get into it for a certain amount of time, 60 days, 90 days, 8 months, whatever it may be. You find something better, you should be able to get out of that, get a prorated refund, put your new policy in play, all of that good stuff, and it should be pretty easy, just like you do on your home insurance or your car insurance.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Yeah, it's right now, especially in the space, not really any penalties, so to speak. It's definitely something you don't necessarily want to make a habit of, right? Like if they
Right,
see
right.
that you're jumping around a lot, that could be a problem. But no, especially right now, there's really no issues. There are some carriers that like to see you, get through, kind of like Larry was just mentioning, like get through 30 or 60 or sometimes 120 days into your policy before you're able to cancel, but pretty much across the board you're able to cancel without ramifications right now.
And I even know the answer to his next question. Yes, DataStream will help you with that. We have
Yes, we will.
done it more
Absolutely.
than once, haven't we, guys?
We have. We have.
Absolutely.
So I hope this has been good for those that's been on here, and I know there's been several that's followed all 3 webinars, and we will be AvTek will be coming out with more webinar series. Typically, we plan on having 1 a month at least, but doing this from an aspect, our whole goal was, instead of trying to take these 3 topics into a 1-hour webinar like most people do, we wanted to spend some time. We wanted to spend 2/3 of the time educating you, and 1/3 of the time how we can help you with it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I hope this format works for you guys. I appreciate y'all really joining in with us. You can go. We've had some broadcast messages that's gone out and some questions that's gone out. One of the broadcast study, if you want to talk to us, figure out how you got to do it. All you got to do is go to Contact AvTek button, click on that. That'll actually generate a meeting on my calendar, which I'll reach out, we'll talk, and we'll go from there and help you guys get where you need to be and make sure your cybersecurity insurance and your security posture is in the right place. I look forward to seeing you again on another webinar. And John and Larry, I can't thank you enough for getting on here, guys. And I love working with you. I really
Absolutely, Wayne. Same here,
Yeah,
man. Same here.
anytime. Always a pleasure.
So if you haven't seen the previous webinars, all you have to do is you can use your registration link. You can go in, you can go to the resources, and you can see all of the previous webinars. Anything that you want to look at. If you have questions, just reach out. The presentations associated to them are on there as well, so you can see them, so you can do homework if you want. And I'll hopefully hear from you very soon. And to everyone, have a great holiday season. Don't eat too much, or should we eat too much? And enjoy your families. John, Larry,
Absolutely.
I'll see you.
Thanks,
soon.
everybody.
Beautiful.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Have a
Wayne,
happy
be good, sir.
Thanksgiving.